Here's a really rare beast, an old Fender Harvard, probably 58 to 60. I will find out more as I go through. Don't see a lot of these. I'm looking forward to it. Let's see what's up with this one. Oh, very pretty. Real good condition on the tweed. 3 inputs like that 58 Vibrolux, volume and tone. Let me turn the volume all the way down and the tone. It's not lined up right on the... Okay, so halfway will be our starting point. Got some dust on it. I'll be setting that so the pointer lines up with the numbers later. In the back, we have a box, tubes and accessories inside. We'll open up that later. Looks to be the original power cable with a spliced on tube connector from a lamp. That's safe. We'll be changing this out for a grounded cable anyway. All right, the old Jensen. The owner says it has been reconed, and it's fine. I hope that's all true, because they're fantastic sounding speakers when they're good. Let me get the rear cover off and we'll take a look inside. Well, it has the asbestos liner for heat management. These things are toxic. I find the best solution is just to lick them until you get all the particles off. I keyed. I will talk to the owner about options for containing the asbestos. You can use sticky adhesive-backed metal tape. You can also just tape it off and spray paint it with some black oven grill paint. There are a lot of options. I'll talk to the owner about that. But what you don't want to do is let that have any airborne particles. So I'm going to put this carefully to the side for right now. Harvard 5F10 and the 6AT6 tube, and no date code on there, so can't date it from that. Anyway, let's see what else is going on with this amp. Well, the owner said it had been recapped, only by the slimmest of technicalities. There's nothing wrong with these tube amp doctor caps in here, but they were installed really sloppily with no support to the board. The negative leads are just wrapped around the leads of the old caps. The bias cap has not been changed out. It's a good way to nuke things. Still has the selenium rectifier, which can, when that fails, it can emit toxic gas. Still has this original electrolytic. These yellow Astrons almost always leak. We'll check for that. So that's crappy work, but at least no harm was done. That can be undone and redone properly. It has the 2-conductor wired in an unsafe way with the cap going to chassis there. Let's make sure the fuse is the correct value. Came with a 3 amp fuse. I'm fairly certain that this should be, oh yeah, right there on the print underneath the dust, 1 amp. So we're going to put a 1 amp fuse in here, so if there's any issue with the amp, we don't lose the power transformer. Little things, man. It's the little things. All right. When we plug it into an outlet, and I want to check for voltage potential between the chassis and ground with a 2-conductor cable, especially an original one, especially one with a terribly spliced end, there's a potential for hazardous voltage to be there. Now, I'm going to change out this power cable anyway, but in the meantime, I'd like to evaluate the amp. I want to make sure it's safe for me to do so. I've got the amp plugged into a multi-receptacle strip and one of the other receptacles, which is wired in parallel with that. I have the black lead in one of the ground positions and the red lead here on the chassis. The amp is powered off but plugged in, and with one orientation of the non-polarized 2-conductor plug, I've got 0.267 volts AC potential between chassis and ground. If I reverse the plug in the outlet and remeasure that, I've got 117 volts potential AC between the chassis and ground, which means I could get electrocuted. You could get electrocuted. Now, how much you get electrocuted, I cannot say. I'm not going to mess around with measuring, because that's a whole other set of measurements that aren't necessary, because we are going to change this power cable out. But that tells me I need to reverse the polarity of the neutron flow, Doctor Who. Now I'm going to reverse the orientation of the 2-conductor plug in the outlet. So I'll get back to that like quarter volt potential. So it'll be safe for me to mess with. We just confirmed that's still the case. Yeah, so that's a safe orientation. I can now turn the amp on and know that I won't get that little tingle that means it's working. Before I power it on, I am going to turn on the light bulb emitter portion of my setup, just in case there's something wrong. And let's power it on. All right, the lamp is not glowing. It may just be a dead bulb. Let me confirm that. With these smoked glass tubes, it's hard to see. No voltage. Why is that? So let's measure the switch. Overload or overlimit, however you want to talk about that. Still, so there's no, since that switch is dead and I have it plugged into a switched receptacle, I don't need to have this switch for evaluation. And since we're going to be changing all this out, we'll get a new Carling switch in there anyway. I'm just going to temporarily resolder this to be always on. This is just a temporary move. I would never suggest doing that to an amp that you're actually going to use. But in this case, it will let me evaluate the rest of the amp with it before I change all this other stuff out. All right, so these are the two bias leak resistors. They're supposed to be 220Ks. Let's measure them. 243, 124. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift one end of it up and temp in. I'm going to lift each of them up a bit and temp in some fresh 220Ks because we need to get that grid supply the same on each one. So if you're coming to my channel and this is the first video you see, please know that this is not an example of my repair work. This is not a final repair. This is a temporary troubleshooting step. So things can sometimes look pretty funky, even though when I'm done, this will look very beautiful. So I had funky things happening at the grids where there was a wide disparity. And so I disconnected the old 220Ks, which actually measure about 260 out of circuit, 260K. I have a new pair of matched known good 220Ks in temporarily. And I pulled this Astron out of the circuit because as I said, these are notorious for leaking. So with these out of the circuit, at the grids for the output tubes, I have negative 26, which is this side not connected to a cap. And I have negative 18, which is on this side. And they should be about the same. This is being drawn less negative, 18 versus 26, whatever, because there is some leakage coming out of this capacitor. Some positive DC is leaking here into what should just be negative and makes it less negative. This one was crazy way off before, and that's because when this one is disconnected, but then has a temped in 1 meg to ground, we actually get 70 volts DC leakage. There should be no DC here, there's 70 volts. Here, on this one, there's 38 volts leakage. Here, it's 103 volts leakage. So I can't even see if the amp makes a good sound until all four of those Astrons are changed out. The one in here on the tone stack can probably stay in place. That has no voltage on it. And the one that's going to chassis ground, the death cap, is going away anyway. So I was hoping to at least see how the amp sounded. I can't do that until those caps are changed out. And I need to change out the electrolytics, and I need to redo these larger electrolytics properly so they're not just temped in and free floating, because that's a crappy job. You know, an amp this old, this scarce, with this much musical heritage deserves more respect. Now, I've not been able to pull a date code yet. There's one I can almost make out on the Jensen, but of course it's partially obscured by the chassis. So I will date this later. If I need to pull the cab out or anything, we can get more accurate. But I can't tell if the last digit on the speaker date code is a 3 or an 8. It seems to be 22643 or 48. So maybe that's 56. I thought these came out in 57, late 57, but there are gaps in my 50s Fender history knowledge, which, I know the circuits really well, but as far as this happened in this year, or for 6 months during this period they did this. Anyway, I don't pretend to know things I don't know, but I know how to make this thing work and sound fantastic, even though my meter wants to interrupt the proceedings. So later we'll get down the road and make sure all the resistors are good and the domino's good and all the tubes are good, and then we'll get into fun stuff of setting it for modern wall voltages, or if the owner's going to use a variac, et cetera, and a lot of cleaning. I want this thing to be worth Lupe's approval. Is that a Lupe or a Lily? Let's take a look and close out the video there. I'll let you guys argue about that handwriting, but something authentic is there.